Hello, dear listeners. This week's episode is on Thomas Pynchon's 1963 novel, V. This kicks off our 3-episode miniseries on Pynchon. We're starting with V, moving to Bleeding Edge, and then ending with Shadow Ticket. I am personally very excited to talk Pynchon. He's been one of my favorites since at least college, and he's somebody that I feel like once I get started talking about, I can't really stop. We've been going long lately, though, so we tried to keep this episode tight and compact. We discuss our history with Pynchon, some of the context and background that Pynchon was drawing on for the peculiar construction of V, with its alternating ensemble beat comedy plots and modernist and historically specific novellas. We also discuss the seeds of Pynchon's future style and future fixations as they appear in this first novel. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Welcome back, animate and inanimate listeners alike, to the Infinite Library. I'm your host, John.
And I'm your host, Animate Ben.
Wait, sorry, no. My name is Jay, period.
Yeah, and I'm Benny, Animate Benny. So, yeah. Or am I? I don't know. Yes.
Maybe that line is hazier than we think, Ben, perhaps. But yes, welcome back to the Infinite Library. Thank you so much for bearing with us over our little Thanksgiving break. Ben and I were feeling a little burned out, and we made the the bold decision to do 2 miniseries in one season. Yeah, so we're back with the first episode in our Pynchon miniseries. We're talking about his first novel today. That is V, period.
From 1963.
Yes, winner of the National Book Award.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. I found a quote. So there's an American postmodernist named Gilbert Sorrentino, and he wrote this book where he's like making fun of various we could say artists' archetypes, and one of them is very snide about V, and I thought I would just read it as a way to start because I think it's pretty funny. So this is the quote: "Guy's old friend in the south of France was finally published by a commercial house in New York. His reputation had grown through his appearances in little magazines, and the publisher had finally decided to take him on to show that he wasn't afraid of publishing fresh young voices. You could die laughing. So that the friend, importuned by Guy, acted as a go-between for him with his editor, a hip young editor, you of course understand. Every publishing house worth its salt has one. They're the ones who find books like V. Very hip indeed." So, yeah, we're coming at you, listeners. We're hep cats. We needed a little bit of a break so we could get on the lingo of V. But yeah, we're snapping our fingers by the bandstand. We're going down to the jazz club to hear, I guess it would be post-bop, where there's no piano player and the solo gets to just do weird solos. And we're stroking our chins because this is, the first book in the Pynchon miniseries. Yeah,
we're bebopping. We're calling people hep cats. We're drawing Conroy on things, or Kilroy on things.
Yeah.
Because we were in the war, I guess.
Yeah, the Kilroy bit in this book we'll have to circle back on because I don't really know what's going on with it. That and the phrase sneaky peeting, where it's like characters are always sneaky peeting out the doorway, which I didn't look up. So
yeah, I definitely have thoughts on the Kilroy thing, which I will definitely have to get to because I think there's something very interesting there about what this whole book is doing. But before we get to that, Ben, so Pynchon, I think it's fair to say, I mean, there's a reason we're doing him in the way that we are, and that is because he is, I think, pretty easy to say, like one of the, definitive voices in American letters of the last century.
And postmodern letters as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I think really there are, other people who are equally good, equally prominent, but I think Pynchon is kind of the apotheosis of like a certain type of artist, for better and perhaps for worse. But you know, he is you know, he's one of the guys. You know, he's one of the guys you have to talk about if you're going to talk about the direction that like American and postmodern literature has moved in the last decades. But he's also someone where if we want to do an entire series on Pynchon, it would be exhausting, and it would take potentially several years for us to actually get through everything like at the pace and level of detail that it deserves.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Which is why perhaps we're starting off with some of the minor works, just kind of to dip our feet in, talk a little bit about him as a writer, as an artist. And, you know, maybe then when we reach the point where we've been doing this long enough that we feel prepared to do, say, Gravity's Rainbow or Against the Day, you know, we don't feel completely out of our depth. In the meantime, Pynchon's also a guy who there are several podcasts completely dedicated to just talking about him. So
right, yeah. And if anything, I think we're providing a little bit of like an interesting look because we're going to talk about his first book today, obviously V, and then we're going to talk about his most, I guess, second to last book, Bleeding Edge, which I haven't read before. It'll be great. I don't think John has either. And then we're going to finish with Shadow Ticket, which came out this year, much to the surprise and wonderment of, I think, a lot of people who like to talk about fiction online, because the impression was that Bleeding Edge was his last book. And yeah, he sort of comes out of the woodwork with Shadow Ticket this year. And then there's rumors that he has another book that might come out at some point, but those haven't been exactly confirmed. So
yeah. So I think the idea here is we're going to try to give as best we can, again, given the fact that we do not have the time, the energy, the skill perhaps to do a full retrospective on Pynchon. I think we're trying to kind of take a look at his career very broadly here by looking at the start, looking at the end, and kind of looking at maybe this interesting epilogue period he has going on right now. Yeah, and really trying to just examine like who is this guy? He's still alive, still kicking. Got to be in his 80s, I guess.
Yeah, 88, I believe.
Yeah, wow. Well, good on him. I hope that I can be as active at 88, by which I mean I hope I can publish one book that is like half as long as anything I've published in the last 20 years.
Yeah, because Bleeding Edge or Shadow Ticket's 300 pages. This was like a hefty 450. I think V was. I feel like he's really like, unless it's Crying a Lot 49, he's always in the like 450 range. It feels like so, or more. So, but
yeah. Ooh. Well, Ben, what is your relationship with Pynchon? I think you're a little more versed in him than I am. So yeah, curious to hear about your relationship with the man.
So I was thinking about that. As I've alluded to in this podcast before, I was one of those weirdos who, by the time I was done with high school, I had read everything by David Foster Wallace, and I had found a list online that was just 5 postmodern novels, and one of them was Gravity's Rainbow. And I believe, and this is where I'm a little bit fuzzy, I think I either read Crying a Lot 49 first or then read Gravity's Rainbow, or vice versa. I can't remember what the order was, but I read Gravity's Rainbow my first year of college, and when I was getting a major in mathematics and English. So it was sort of just like it hit me right in the right spot because Pynchon was an engineer. And I think he lends this perspective where it's not exactly mathematical, but he's, you know, one of the people who people tend to only think of when they talk about systems novelists, because he sort of has this sort of understanding of science, technology, society, math, as well as a feel for poetry, metaphor, symbolism, and these like huge sort of like metaphors that are almost like, you know, runaway trains at times. And that combination was like exactly the right sort of drug for freshman college me. And I feel like I read Gravity's Rainbow and it kind of like it warped my brain. And then from that point on, I was just like, I got to read all of Pynchon. I love this guy. And then later, And this, I think, didn't happen until later. You start to realize that not only is Pynchon making all this stuff up because he's a fiction writer, but some of this is actually true. And that he's using real historical incident to talk about the intersection of like capitalism and the entertainment industry, the ways that like mankind becomes increasingly like technologized and roboticized, as we'll talk about later, and just like these forces of history that sweep everybody up regardless of what you think about like individual autonomy. And like all of that stuff is based in like real historical incident. And that was a feeling that is the feeling, and we'll talk about it, but I don't want to get too much into it now, of like paranoia. The idea that everything he's talking about is real and happened, and that you just need to look under the rock, so to speak, and see everything that's going on, like the secret history. And that feeling we can talk about or not. I don't think it's all of Pynchon, but it is a big part of it. And it leads people to go on these rabbit holes and develop huge podcasts to kind of uncover every real historical artifact that's in his stuff. And I think that combination was like just catnip my freshman year of college, and I've slowly tried to not read all of his stuff. So if we're finishing the like Bleeding Edge this time, and I've not read that one yet, so it'll be nice to just have finished all of his stuff because I liked it so much and I wanted to save some for later. So I think, again, like, I'm not saying you have to have a math and an English background, but I feel like that part lent me to kind of be like, wow, I really like all of this. So
I think Pynchon, I don't want to speak too out of turns here, but he is clearly such a like magpie brained like trivia head.
Yeah.
I almost feel like regardless of where your like personal or professional interests lie, like there's going to be some little snippet or factoid that like he slips in there that will be like, feel like it's directly aimed at you.
Yeah, exactly.
That's great. So this was not your first time reading V, correct?
I actually, when you suggested this series, John, I was so excited that I read it in March of this year. And so then this is the second time I read it, but it might as well have been the first time. So
that's amazing. So I'm definitely more of a novice than you, Ben. I did not come to Pynchon until a little later in my reading career. I was firmly out of college and kind of trying to kind of patch up some holes in like my personal like reading history. And I knew, I obviously had heard of Pynchon for a long time. I knew he was the guy who appeared with a bag on his head in that episode of The Simpsons.
Yeah.
But I'd never actually gotten to reading any of his books, partially because they were always, presented to me as these really intimidating, dense, maybe not frightening, but intimidating pieces of work.
Yeah.
So I picked up Crying of Lot 49 from the library, gave it a read a couple of years ago in the spring, and kind of had my mind blown by it. But like you said, it's a little hard. That's a tough one actually to start with, I think. It might not be where I would recommend someone actually start with Pynchon, just because it is so much like shorter and kind of like concentrated. Like it kind of feels like you're getting the straight dope with that one in a way that like the other ones, they don't feel flabby, but they're even more maximalist.
Right. Yeah.
But I've since read Inherent Vice, which is probably actually where I would suggest someone start with Pynchon.
Yeah, definitely.
And now I've read this, so very excited to get.
Wait, you've read Gravity's Rainbow too, though, right?
I've read part of Gravity's Rainbow.
Oh,
I've never gotten all the way through.
I just assumed you had finished it because I remember you were talking about reading it, and I was sending you like the Jack Nicholson going, yeah, like gifs to you, but I guess you didn't finish it. Oh, that's fine.
I'm embarrassed. Yeah. I'm embarrassed. Yeah. I will commit seppuku after this episode to make up for the fact that I've not read Gravity's Rainbow.
I mean, to be fair,
it's so big.
To be fair, John,
the
first time I read it, I got so pissed off at the ending that I just skipped to the end. Like, because like without spoiler, like the narrative fragments, and I was like so unschooled in postmodern literature at that point, even though I'd read Infinite Jest, that I literally was like, fuck you, and I didn't finish it. And then like half a year later, I went went back and I was like, I gotta reread this from the beginning, and then I read it all the way through. But so yeah, I initially I'm with you there, John. But yeah, at some point you'll finish it. It'll be fun.
I'll admit this is a character flaw in me as a reader, and that's that if I feel like I'm going through a book too slowly, I get really frustrated.
Yeah.
And that was a book where I realized pretty quickly, like, oh, I'm reading like 20 pages an hour just because it's so dense. And I got like a third of the way through, and I got frustrated just at how slow I was moving and how it was keeping me from reading other stuff. Yeah. And so I, to my great and eternal shame, put it down. But it's something I want to get to. It's just a matter of finding the right time. And maybe there isn't a right time, and I just need to do it. We'll see.
Well, if anything, listener, this series is, to find smaller handholds than Gravity's Rainbow. So in some ways, it's perfectly fitting. But
yes, much like the man at the cafe at the end of 2666, where we were discussing the minor works so that the major works may shine all the brighter.
Yeah, we're concealing the greatness.
Well, let's actually get to talking about V then. Ben, this is a really weird book.
Very weird, and I'll be honest, John, initially kind of frustrating, as we'll get into, I think because of the way it's constructed. And so to basically give you the quick skinny for the structure, listener, and then we can see where we want to go. There are two like intersecting lines that form a V, rather interestingly enough, for V. One of them is Herbert Stencil, who is this like I think the time in the novel, he's like a 55-year-old, not exactly a spy, but kind of, and he's on the hunt for this mysterious woman named V, and we get his hunt quest through various historical interludes that sort of function as independent chapters. But on the other hand, the other part of the V, if you will, is the story of Benny Profane, a human schmeal, who is, it's sort of like he's bumming around New York with all of these like jazz bows and like bohemian artist degenerate types. And these stories interweave. And that lends reading this book a sort of strange feeling where you'll be reading one plot line and then you'll be shunted into like a historical episode whose purpose is hard to discern sometimes until like you're done with that chapter, and that alternating happens throughout the whole course of the book, and it's quite as you said, John, weird and also somewhat confusing.
Yeah, and especially at the beginning of the book. So the book is arranged in chapters, but the chapters are really almost more novellas, like especially towards the beginning, before kind of the plot, as it were, kind of starts really showing its face, and you kind of get a feel for like how these two threads start to interweave with each other, where that V meets. Like the individual chapters kind of feel very much like they are their own discrete stories. It's probably not until kind of the midway point in this book, I think I would say kind of that transition from the chapter on the Herero genocide.
Oh, yeah.
Mondragon's report, that the book actually kind of fully becomes like a novel instead of a collection of novellas.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that the third chapter, which is the first one of the novellas, is actually a version of a story that Pynchon had written earlier that he sort of like. And I wouldn't say that V is quite a fix-up, because it's not like he published all these novellas previously, but he did like write and publish the third chapter previously with different characters and a slightly different spin. And so that sort of is, again, I think maybe it contributed to his construction of this book. There's also a very illuminating bit in the beginning of Slow Learner, which is Pynchon's collection of all of his previous short stories that was published in 1984, which we might say is during like a fallow period for Pynchon. And I just wanted to read you something, because I think he's not talking about V directly, but I think this applies to V. So he's talking about when he was in a literature program at Cornell. He says, We were encouraged from many directions. Kerouac and the Beat Writers, the diction of Saul Bellow and the adventures of Augie March, emerging voices like those of Herbert Gold and Philip Roth, to see how at least two very distinct kinds of English could be allowed in fiction to exist. Allowed? It was actually okay to write like this? Who knew? The effect was exciting, liberating, strongly positive. It was not a case of either or, but an expansion of possibilities. And then since it's Pynchon, he makes an interesting political point. I don't think we were consciously groping after any synthesis, although perhaps we should have been. The success of the New Left later in the 60s was to be limited by the failure of college kids and blue-collar workers to get together politically. And as he says, the conflict in those days was like almost everything else, muted. In its literary version, it's shaped up as traditional versus beat fiction. And so I think the Herbert Stencil chapters, the novellas, are like Herbert Stencil, maybe we could say like modernist or traditional fiction. And then the Benny Profane chapters are the like, I'm doing kind of a riff on the beats. Like, you know, this is like literary like writing as it's happening now in, I guess it would be like early 60s. Although that book, the Benny Profane stuff is set in 1957, I believe. Or maybe it's 56, one of the two. Yeah. So. Yeah.
No, that's a really interesting insight there, Ben. I think that is actually a really fruitful way to look at this book. And I think you can kind of, again, see the ways in which this kind of carries forward into Pynchon's fiction, where you kind of see the way that like there are divisions and the way that these books kind of set things up. There's obviously a lot of Pynchon loves doing little jingles and songs in all his books.
Yeah, definitely.
And they're mostly confined in this book to the beat section. The beat sections are like a lot more knowingly silly, whereas the stencil sections, like it's kind of more wry, maybe even like British inflected humor, which makes sense kind of given the very British characters we end up kind of spending a lot of our time with in those sections.
Yeah. Oh, there's one other fun thing I wanted to read from Slow Learner John that I think applies. At some point he talks about finding a beat magazine, and he says, in 1956 in Norfolk, Virginia, I had wandered into a bookstore and discovered issue 1 of the Evergreen Review, then an early forum for beat sensibility. It was an eye-opener. I was in the Navy at the time, but I already knew people who would sit in circles on the deck and sing perfectly in parts all those early rock and roll songs, who played bongos and saxophones, who felt honest grief when Bird and later Clifford Brown died. By the time I got back to college, I found academic people deeply alarmed over the cover of the Evergreen Review, then current, not to mention what was inside. It looked as if the attitude of some literary folks toward the Beat generation was the same as that of certain officers on my ship toward Elvis Presley. They used to approach those among the ship's company who seemed likely sources, comb their hair like Elvis, for example. What's his message? They'd interrogate anxiously. What does he want? So just the idea of Elvis Presley being like alarming to like this old guard, like in the same way that the Beats were alarming to like academics, it's just fascinating. So, but
there's definitely, I mean, there is like a very conscious, like, generational split in this book. You know, the fact that we don't really spend a lot of time with Stencil, like as he is in the contemporary moment the book is set in. We only kind of follow him really mostly taking other people's statements of historical events that they lived through.
And when he shows up at the party, he's like that one old guy at the party reference, like, why is he here? like no one says that, but you can imagine just like a 55-year-old man at your like beat party, and everyone there is like maybe like 25 or something. Like I didn't quite get a sense of how old everyone was like of the beat people. It seemed like they were in like their maybe early 20s, but yeah, he would be the odd man out, and then we mostly get his historical stuff, like you said. So
I think that almost gets to like a weaker point, I think, in for this book. A lot of people really do consider this to maybe be one of Pynchon's it feels kind of weird to say worst novels, because like a bad Pynchon is still like better than most people's best. But like we said, one of the lesser works, very definitely like one of the lesser works. And I almost feel like that does kind of get to something I think is a little weak here, in that Pynchon is always writing in a pretty satirical lens through a lot of his books. And this kind of feels like a weird one in that, like, it feels like a little too close. Like Benny Profane very much feels like a bit of a self-insert.
Yeah.
And like I very much like read some of these characters in kind of the beat sections, and they feel like, oh, this is Pynchon like probably writing about friends of his. In kind of an oblique way. And maybe part of it's just like the beats have never been like particularly close to my heart. So I'm like missing references, or missing why certain things are funny. But there's just kind of like this sense of like he's a little too close. He kind of like doesn't really get into like the full level of absurdity that you could pull from this, because he feels a little too affectionate towards some of these characters. Like the targets of like derision in this section are like the squares, or like women just in general.
I think maybe we'll get into it, but I think of this book, I feel like immediately he was like, I gotta get better about writing women like after this book, because like he immediately writes Crying a Lot 49, and that's like a female protagonist who I think is portrayed pretty sympathetically, and then in here it's just kind of like, it's very like boys club kind of like women, can't live with them, can't live without them, like kind of that's the vibe. And so we should probably talk about, so the anchor for the beat chapters, we could say, is Benny Profane, a human schmill. And, it's Yiddish for loser. And I would say Benny Profane is kind of like, what if you actually tried to portray like a beat protagonist, i.e. a guy who doesn't want any human connection, still wants to get laid, but doesn't want to be attached to anyone, and also is constantly beset by the inanimate world. There's that scene where like he's trying to take a shower and like the handle comes off, and he's like razor cuts himself, and then he like his pants get caught in like a door, and like there's like it's like a comedy of like the inanimate world like attacking him, and like the fact that he portrays him kind of as like a loser, I think, is interesting, as opposed to being like this like noble Kerouacian, like I'm pursuing the real, and instead it's just like Benny Profane like can't commit to anything, and he's frequently described as being like a human yo-yo, where he's just constantly like bouncing around and not like committing to any like dependence is the word that he uses.
Yeah, we find him at the start of the story. He's like just gotten discharged from the Navy, much like Pynchon. And we kind of follow him as he, tries and fails to like hold down a job and get laid, throughout kind of late 50s New York City. I did kind of start vibing with this book when he gets his first job as an alligator hunter in the New York sewers.
Right, yeah.
Which, is kind of this thing where it almost feels like a little too cartoonish compared to some Pynchon. But was just charming enough that it won me over pretty quickly.
Well, there's like scenes of like them they get off work, and then him and his work friends just immediately get fucking trashed and are like at like a festival, and like one of the, I think maybe it's in Italy, like it's in the Little Italy festival, and like they're just getting drunk and like falling down and like getting into scrapes with gangs, and it's like fun in a way that like the stencil chapters are more like serious, because they're like quote unquote what the book is about, we could say, even though it's about both. But like the mysterious V shows up in the stencil chapters, and less so in Benny's like, and then he hangs out with the whole sick crew, and as we've been saying, the whole sick crew is like this extended, like making fun of bohemians where all they do is talk and throw parties and get drunk, and they don't actually like make anything, and they're not like productive. So
they all have pretensions to being artists, but it's mostly an excuse to do what they really want to do, which is party and fuck and talk about stuff other people's made, so they can show off how erudite and well read they are.
Yeah, and it's worth noting. Stencil is observing them in a later chapter, and he says about the whole sick crew, of which Benny is a part of. But they produce nothing but talk, and at that, not very good talk. A few, like Slab, actually did what they professed, turned out a tangible product. But again, what? Cheese danishes, or this technique for the sake of technique, catatonic expressionism, on parodies of what someone else had done. So much for art. Would have thought. The crew had developed a kind of shorthand whereby they could set forth any visions that might come their way. Conversations at the Spoon, which is where they hang out, the Rusty Spoon, had become little more than proper nouns, literary allusions, critical or philosophical terms linked in certain ways. Depending on how you arranged the building blocks at your disposal, you were smart or stupid. Depending on how others reacted, they were in or out. The number of blocks, however, was finite. Mathematically, boy, Stencil is speaking, he told himself, if nobody else original comes along, they're bound to run out of arrangements someday. What then? What indeed? This sort of arranging and rearranging was decadence, but the exhaustion of all possible permutations and combinations was death. Which I think is a very sobering conclusion that Stencil comes to, but it also gets to like, yeah, this sort of feeling that they're just kind of like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, and they're not actually, doing anything of substance. And if you're hip, you're cool with saying like, yes, my Lacanian interlocutor, even if you don't know who Lacan is or not, or like you're cool if you can smash together isms in a way that's interesting, which, John, we were talking off mic, reminded us of Twitter chats, as well as various other groups of people we might know of. So,
well, I was going to say, that's a really interesting quote to pull out, because it is kind of Pynchon almost kind of giving a whole description of like postmodernism writ large, like kind of at the like before anyone's actually like defined that term. And I think maybe expressing some of his own anxiety about again, I enjoy Pynchon a lot, but there is like a way you could describe him as like he is just taking all these facts and trivia and like mashing them together with like 50-cent words, so that it all looks like very, very sparkling and dazzling, but like I feel like there's a real question there of like, am I doing anything genuinely new, or am I just kind of like taking all the information and kind of erudition that has like become available to me as like a subject in like post-war America, and am I just kind of like pushing the blocks around and like thinking that I'm making something new, but really like there's no newness here. Everything has already kind of been set in stone, and best I can do is just kind of like rearrange them in a way that might look interesting to some other fucking caged ape like myself.
Well, yeah, and like people have said like V is really like a last gasp of modernism book, and it's not quite as postmodern as of his other stuff, and other people say, yeah, it's postmodern. But I do think there's something here in this sort of like intent to dazzle, as well as the need to go to like historical sources for like the really heavy stuff in the book, like Mondagon's story, where it's about the Herero genocide, and like Pynchon put all this research into that, and like that would return in Gravity's Rainbow. I don't know if you got to that part, John. Well, I guess you didn't, but like there's a long bit about the Herero genocide in Gravity's Rainbow, so it's like he even goes back to the well there because he thinks that story is worth telling. But again, it's one that he had to like go dig up, and it's not quite like what's happening now, which in the frame of this book is just getting drunk and going to the jazz club and like falling down. So because there's a lot of that.
Well, there's something there I think that again is interesting, and I think gets to what this book maybe is saying more deeply, and that is kind of about this question of oh fuck, I just lost it. Oh, I remember now. So I think that is an interesting kind of perspective to offer, Ben, because I think that there is something really interesting in this book, and kind of like I just said about sort of this precognition of like postmodernism at like the very start of it. There's something really fascinating about this book, and I think about Pynchon's kind of whole oeuvre. This kind of question, we've talked about this before, the way that one of the great pleasures of like reading books from like the past is kind of real. Again, this realization like, oh, people have always felt this way in certain ways. Obviously, what that means is going to vary a little bit book to book, but like the anxieties being expressed in V about technology, about the direction of like American and like more broadly like human culture in kind of the industrial and like post-industrial age. These worries about like modernity and like what it like that kind of alienation is doing to us all feel like very familiar.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that like this is being written, theoretically like at the time that now everyone likes to look back at and be like, oh man, that was the golden age.
Everything was great. Yeah.
And I think that there's something there in terms of like Pynchon as kind of a pioneer of what, I think of as kind of the paranoid style in American literature.
Yes.
This kind of watching everyone else have a good time and being like, oh, this seems deeply sinister in a way. I think particularly about the sections in this book about plastic surgery. Which are pretty gnarly, pretty gruesome.
Yeah, there's an extended bit, listener, where you're described all of the ways or the minute detail in which somebody would get a nose job, and it's described like in this sort of clinical, very scary, like removed tone. So horror movie style narration in a way. But I did find that to be very interesting. And now maybe it's just that, again, because of the internet and things, we're all kind of Pynchonian now in a way that people in the past maybe weren't. We also have access to, I really like wonder, like, what was Pynchon like up to? Like, how did he like accumulate all this like minutia at a time where it's like you didn't have the internet? Like, he reads like someone who had the internet. Back in the 50s. Well, there's stories of him just like spending all this time at the library, like digging up primary sources. I think he was like a big archivist guy. So
it's just crazy that he was able to do that and also like maintain like his job as an engineer and like doing a writing program and like getting any work done.
Well, so as a slight bit, the speculation goes that at some point he gets hired by Boeing, sort of as like a guy that does technical writing. And Boeing, which actually shows up in this book as Yo-Yo-Dine, although not to the extent that it will in Crying Out Loud 49, he sees basically Boeing hire Wernher von Braun. and like, as he becomes aware that Boeing is hiring Wernher von Braun, Boeing is trying to put together an early version of the internet, DARPANET, which is a military technology, as well as probably writing press release for rockets. Post World War II, he basically gets so anointed that he realizes that like the technological apparatus which Germany used in World War II is being exported to the United States. And that's like, if you want to say it, that's one version of the Gravity's Rainbow is about, is that. And I think in that case, along with being a great archivist, he just happened to be there when all this stuff was happening, and he was anointed enough, as you say, John, to realize it. And to your point about like reflecting contemporary anxiety, there's a bit where Profane is the night watchman for a like engineering lab called Anthro Research, and he has to take care of this like robot humanoid named Shroud, and Shroud exists to basically get bombarded by like radioactive waves to test how those waves would affect humans. And then as he's like staring at Shroud starts talking to him. So regarding to what you said, John, while at Anthro Research, Profane listened with half an ear to the coffee percolating and carried on in another imaginary conversation with Shroud. By now, that had become a tradition. And this is delivered basically like it's interior, like it's not attributed dialogue. It's basically just Shroud talking. Remember, Profane, how it was on Route 14 south outside Elmira, New York? You walk on an overpass and look west and see the sun setting on a junk pile, acres of old cars piled up 10 high in rusting tiers, a graveyard for cars. If I could die, that's what my graveyard would look like. I wish you would. Look at you masquerading like a human being. You ought to be junked, not burned or cremated. Of course, like a human being. Now, remember right after the war, the Nuremberg war trials? Remember the photographs of Auschwitz? Thousands of Jewish corpses stacked up like those poor car bodies. Schmiel, it's already started. Hitler did that. He was crazy. Hitler, Eichmann, Mengele, 15 years ago. Has it occurred to you that there may be no more standards for crazy or sane now that it's started? What, for Christ's sake? Then it just ends. So, like, the idea of like this concern, post World War II with the increasingly mechanization of human life, and then like that leading to the equivocation of like bodies with junked cars. That's like a concern, that feels very real to me now. And as you said, John, it's also like he's talking to ChatGPT during the sequence where he's basically like trying to attribute this robot some shred of humanity. And it's worth talking about now, I think, the other concern in this book, which is the animate versus the inanimate. And it's one of the themes that runs throughout the entire book. It's another way that he's getting to what you were saying, John, this like concern with the direction society is headed, especially post World War II. And it's a theme in the book that I feel like is hard to pin down because the terms slide around a lot. But like one of the biggest ways that shows up is, as we said, like Benny Profane, the inanimate hates him. He's constantly dropping things and his like alarm clock never goes out, and he doesn't have respect for objects. But in the Stencil chapters, as Stencil is tracking this mysterious woman named V, every time she shows up in the novellas, she's increasingly more mechanized. Like one time she has like a clockwork eye. Another time she has like a jewel in her navel, and she has like fake legs or like an arm made of like metal. And so as this woman is portrayed in these stories, she becomes more mechanized, which we could read as like the way American society is going, throughout history, or society everywhere. Like increasingly mechanization is like Pynchon's big theme, but also like the inanimate and animate shows up in other places too. So what did you think about that theme? Because Pynchon kind of like really wants to make sure that you're getting it because he repeats it a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I agree with you. I think that he never quite gets to the point of really defining his terms. There's something very strange about the fact that he wants this to be kind of the core like philosophical dichotomy at the heart of the book.
Yeah.
But like there's something very weird about the fact like he talks about the inanimate, but he also attributes like a mind to it at some level.
Yeah.
Like
yeah.
the inanimate is not simply like that which does not live. It also has this like malevolent intelligence. And like Benny Profane does not just like feel like the inanimate world is conspiring against him. He feels like it is punishing him for his sins and transgressions. And again with the character of V herself, she is slowly like cyberneticized, I guess we would say, over the course of, I guess really like the first half or so of the 20th century. But and I'm not saying this like I wanted this to be like more of a sci-fi novel and like we figure out like how that happens.
Right. Yeah.
But it's just this thing that like is presented to us almost in like a magical realist style.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the like kind of way that it develops over the course of time, but then we never really get like a full denouement of that. Like she never shows up again in the contemporary period. We kind of see like the full development of this. It's always like we're kind of like left hanging. And we can talk a little bit about what happens to her, what we think happens to her,
right?
In kind of her last appearance in the story, and maybe what Pynchon is trying to say there. But there is kind of this weird hole in the book that I feel like she does not quite like fully cohere as an image that like, she feels like this character that's supposed to be like kind of either this unification of the animate and inanimate, or again, kind of this like animate thing that like manages to actually join the world of the inanimate.
Yeah.
But like, what does that really mean? Because
right,
it's there's a one of the historical asides is the journals of a Maltese man, Fausto
Magistral?
I think it's Magistral. Yeah.
Yeah. And he describes himself at one point. He kind of describes these like subsequent like incarnations of himself over the course of his life, and Fausto the Third, he says, is like the closest he's ever gotten to becoming like non-human, and he defines that not as like becoming animalistic but becoming inanimate, which means having no thoughts.
Right.
He's so traumatized by a bombing raid that he essentially like becomes catatonic for a period of time,
and like he identifies with the Rock of Malta, like which will shelter them all from the bombs, because at one point Malta was like the most bombed place in all of, I guess, World War II, I think. So yeah, like that's where Pynchon decides to set that. But yeah, he's like, no thoughts, I'm just a rock. So
yeah, whereas V, we don't ever really like, get into V's head. We don't get like V's narration, but she seems to have agency the whole time we are with her, and so I don't quite know how we're supposed to take her kind of roboticization.
Yeah.
If she like is becoming inanimate, but is simultaneously like retaining some kind of humanity.
Yeah. Like for instance, we get the chapter where they're in like 1914 Paris, France, and she's in love, but the relationship is very strange and not handled very well, involving like a dancer child who's going to be sacrificed in a parody of the Rite of Spring. The French chapter, not my favorite historical chapter. I feel like it was a little too weird, and not like in a way that I usually associate like good, weird Pynchon. But
it felt like Pynchon like trying to write like Angela Carter for a minute, in a way that didn't quite work.
That's a good description of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's this thing where it's like, I can't totally fault him because like, again, he's writing this in the late 50s, but like, there's just some like straight guy trying to write about lesbians and not quite getting it.
Yeah, because like she has a lesbian relationship with like this 15-year-old dancer, and they like to look at each other in the mirror, and like like there's all this reference to how the dancer is only what kind of clothes she's wearing, like she's not inanimate, or she's not animate, she's inanimate. Also, there's the theme that technically V might be Herbert Stencil's mother. And that when he's trying to find V, he's trying to find his mom, because his dad dies very mysteriously in Malta. And that's very traumatic for Herbert. His dad, Sidney Stencil, who is an actual spy, whereas Herbert is sort of like pretending to be a spy, rather interestingly enough. Sidney Stencil is like he's there when there's an uprising in Florence, which is another one of the historical chapters. Yeah, as you're saying, John, it's hard to understand what it all means that V is a woman who's turning into like mechanization. Because in Gravity's Rainbow, to me, he's a lot clearer about like the political stakes of what's going on, and that's why people like him so much. But with V, it's like the political stakes are a little like confused, or if not confused, not stated directly. So
yeah, and it's interesting because it's a text that I think is pretty politically astute in a lot of ways. Like again, the Herero genocide chapters are harrowing.
Yeah,
some of the most upsetting stuff I think I've read this year.
Well, and like that, John, too, is like just all of the themes of Gravity's Rainbow are like super condensed in the Herero chapter. It's like it's like fucking the villain in Gravity's Rainbow is in that chapter, Captain Blissero, but he's more of like this goofy character than like this figure of pure evil as he shows up in Gravity's Rainbow. Also, like that chapter is like hallucinatory in the way Gravity's Rainbow is. The Herero chapter rocks, and also, as you said, John, very upsetting stuff. So,
well, I was going to say, I think that like, again, speaking as someone who is again not like a total like Pynchon master here, but has read enough and listened to other people talk about him enough that I feel like I know a bit. I think that there's something going on in this book. Like, again, this is his first novel.
Right.
This is him kind of getting his sea legs and really kind of defining what he wants to do. And I think that the Herero chapter is like basically where we see the intellectual and like creative project that he is subsequently going to embark on after this book.
Yeah.
The fact that like he kind of leaves behind this animate inanimate distinction in his later work and gets much more into like
I don't know if I want to quite say like humanist versus like anti-humanist, or like, he, like you said, Ben, he's interested in the ways that kind of history like personalizes and depersonalizes people, and kind of the arbitrary, frightening way that happens. And that is what the Herrera chapter is about. It is about people being treated like objects for completely arbitrary reasons of history.
Yeah.
In a way that like later it just doesn't quite come together, because it doesn't feel like it's a fully like, it's just not a coherent thesis at the end of the day. Like, I think that when I think about later Pynchon, the thing that stands out to me is that the human element remains much more important, even though, again, there is kind of this sense of like people are lost in the gears of history. There are always people like trying to ride that wave and like control, like that's the conspiracy element in Pynchon.
Yeah.
You have people who are like doing their best to like puppeteer things, even while like the tides of history remain like at some level out of their control. And so it's kind of this thing where it's like, yes, there is like a, quasi almost divine status afforded to like the circumstances of the world, in the same way that like kind of the quote unquote inanimate world is given in this book. But it's also a product of like human beings and like their desire to like control these forces, or to use them to their own ends. I think Gravity's Rainbow probably being the biggest example of that, again, given my limited reading of this. But again, I'm thinking about kind of the kind of conspiracy in the background of Inherent Vice. Where you have all these people who are like taking advantage of Vietnam to run drugs and make a bunch of money. Meanwhile, again, the war is still happening. They're not causing the war, but like they're not helping. Like the war is presumably worse because these people are doing this stuff.
It's a convenient thing, like a cover or something.
Yeah. Or again, I mean, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds with Crying of Lot 49, but the stuff that book may or may not be saying about the JFK assassination.
Right.
And kind of the conspiracies in that book. But I think that's my position here. I think that chapter is, I mean, I think you can see where Pynchon goes in a lot of places in this book. Like I said, all the fucking songs, all the cute ass fucking names, but also I think, these questions he has about like, why is the world the way it is? And I think in a kind of a strange way, I think a lot of Pynchon is kind of asking like, why do I get to fucking do this?
Yeah.
Why am I like blessed to be able to like, rearrange the fucking shiny rocks while I know like there are people like enslaved halfway across the world so that I can enjoy like the American way of life.
Well, and like there's the dispossessed even in like Benny Profane is constantly coming up against people that have it like way worse than him, and he's just kind of like just being a bum. Like it's like that bit about Kerouac. It could always go home to his mom whenever it got too tough for Kerouac when he was out on the road, and it's like where's the privilege in this position? And I also think too like well, I mean, he doesn't quite get it. I mean, he gets into it a little bit. Like there's a great bit. I really like the bit where Rachel Owlglass's backstory is provided, and she talks about how like living in Long Island and like the rich people is like living in this fantasy land where like everyone does what they're supposed to, and there are servants to take care of everything, and there's nothing like ever confusing. And the narrative goes like, why would a girl wish to escape from this? Why not stay in this ensconced world? And I think we don't see like the political stuff isn't quite as like we could say like desperate as not desperate, but like urgent in later stuff, but it's still there. And I think like, you know, the idea of like Benny Profane getting kind of like the bad ending we could talk about, because I feel like some people read the end of Benny Profane's plot fight as hopeful, but I don't. I think it just sort of ends with him like trapped in his like life of being a schmeal and not like learning anything. And I think that has to do with like, you know, having dependence, taking responsibility, like thinking about why you're the one who gets to do these things, versus, not doing that. And then on the flip side is Herbert Stencil, who I guess will never take no for an answer. So regarding who V is and why you should give up looking for her. Oh yeah, you had said something earlier I wanted to touch on before we go elsewhere. The unreliable narrator part of the Herbert Stencil chapters is really important. The phrase is stencilized, and the idea that like Herbert Stencil is only saying what he wants to hear or like relating what he wants to get out of these historical chapters. And it usually has to do with where V is and what V's doing. Even when I think it's implied like in Mondagon's story that V might not have even been there. The idea that like Mondagon is like, I was in this fucked up thing in this, you know, in West Africa, and Stencil hears it and like inserts V into the story at some point. And so like, I think that unreliable narratorness is an interesting aspect of the Stencil chapters. And that feels like more, I mean, I guess we could say it's modernist, but that feels like it's approaching postmodernism too. So, but anyway, to return to your point, I think the Pynchon being like, why do I get to do this? Why am I in this position? I think that creeps into this, you know, first novel in interesting ways. So.
Yeah. No, I like what you said there. I think that the Stencil sections are definitely, again, I think I mentioned this earlier, definitely where I find like more of interest in this book. Don't get me wrong. I love the like cutesy shit in Pynchon. Like I like the silly songs. I like the silly names. But
do you like the like Three Stooges stuff, like with people like chasing each other around the room or like almost getting like killed by like rays that cook hamburger in that one scene? Like I like the Three Stooges stuff too, basically is what I was saying.
I do too. I think again, my thing is more like, again, I think in terms of like looking at this as a first novel. I mean, there's always going to be kind of a dichotomy there. There just has to be. But the dichotomy in this book feels so much more severe in other books.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Where he manages to kind of blend the two into each other a little bit more and kind of find the horror in the absurdity and the absurdity in the horror a bit more. Again, I think, not to keep going back to it, the Herrero chapter does that really well, where, you know, there's all these, you know, it's about Mondragon is like this English agent who like goes to basically this like part German, part Boer. Like,
technically he's German, right? Because he's a German engineering student, but
he's working for the English government.
Yeah.
And like, again, it gets a little surreal, but you know, there's just kind of this like incredibly like horny and disgusting like colony of these like inbred Boers, you know, just lording it over Africa, but also like longing for the days where they could have been worse.
Well, yeah, because it's like when he gets there's a Herero uprising, and they're remembering the original Herero uprising, which started the genocide, and so they all have this like weird, like it's like a Walter Benjamin, like the past like jumps into the present, except it's more like them just like longing for this, like it's like this weird desire to oppress people, and it like comes back in this like party.
Like they remember, like they're all like talking about how they remember like 1904 and how much better things were then. And it's because they could be like openly genocidal in a way that like they kind of can't now.
Yeah, and it took me to this second read through to realize like when that section shifts into the U, it's Fopple. It's the guy who's in charge of the like the manor where the party's being thrown, and he's like basically like remembering like how fucked up and weird it was, and like how much he like was like having a great time, but he also realized that like this whole project was doomed like from the start. like the idea that like they're gonna like it's all gonna come to nothing even though they're doing all this genocide. Like I didn't realize it was like his perspective until this read through, but so
Yeah, that's something that does, I feel like, happen a couple times in the historical sections where it shifts narrators very suddenly. Like there's a lot of that in kind of like the section in Egypt. I think we skipped between like 2 or 3 different narrators. And even like in Fausto's chapter, there are kind of all the weird like bits where it's like he's writing a letter, but then like he'll put in excerpts from his own journal.
Right.
Yeah. So a lot going on in those sections. And I do feel like, yeah, that's maybe a bit more modernist in kind of its tone, kind of playing around with sort of not physicality exactly, but sort of like layers of a narrative and like a very like not clear cut exactly, but like there's like a line you can find and it's like this is the part where this part starts, and then you return back at a later point.
And there's like a collage of like voices too. Yeah.
I feel like we might have lost like a little bit of our point there somewhere along the way, but that's a great chapter, man.
Yeah. That's a great chapter, and I feel like when I read it, I feel the most excited at that chapter because my experience of reading V is sort of like fits and starts, where it's like oh, we're back with the Benny chapters, like oh, now we're in another historical episode, and yeah, just to agree, I feel like it really cooks during that part. Were there any other historical chapters that you really liked besides Mondagon's one? I guess it would be Mondaugen. I'm sure Dan's gonna get mad at us, whatever the German pronunciation is.
I like the Fausto chapter. I think that it does a good job kind of setting up Malta in our minds as like a place. Malta ends up being probably the most important like location in the novel after, I guess, New York. And maybe there's kind of a something there in terms of kind of like Manhattan as like an island and Malta as an island and kind of these like imperial heartlands or something like that. But I the Egypt chapter I didn't dislike, but I didn't quite know what we were doing yet at that point. I almost kind of want to go back and reread that one. And then, like you said, the Paris one I found pretty. I didn't hate it. Like I said, it felt like kind of reading a pastiche of like writers that I like a lot.
Right.
But it just didn't quite come to anything for me. And again, it's definitely like the point where his writing about women feels like the most kind of like nasty in a way. Like, I don't think it's like exactly like hateful, but like basically this like 15-year-old at the end, like, is accidentally like impaled like vaginally on like a wooden stake as part of a ballet performance,
which is supposed to be like the rite of spring. Yeah,
because it's implied she's too enamored with her costume, and she forgets to like put on the safety device that's supposed to like protect her at this like crucial moment in the performance.
She's too inanimate, John.
But even then, even in that section, there are still like bits that I liked, like the bit where they're when the show starts and it's like there was the faction that was already like calling themselves like the director's name was like Propescue or something like that. There was a group that was already calling themselves Propescuists, and of course there were the anti-Propescuists. And then there were the people who just like wanted to make a lot of noise, and so there were three factions already engaged at the beginning, and no one could actually hear the performance.
Yeah, well, see, and I thought that was also like a parody of like the going to the jazz club, where at one point in McClintock's sphere, the jazz musician is like, yeah, there are half the people in this club like don't like my music, the other half like it, and then the third are just using it as background to talk. I will say that McClintock's sphere, the jazz musician, is like one of the few people who actually makes art, and the narrative is like he's a good artist, like he's actually doing something new, and he's trying to like do new stuff, and he's not just talking about it. He's like the one person who I think comes across well as an artist and not somebody doing like just parodies of stuff. And like this would have been like, you know, post Charlie Parker. So this would have been like post Bop. And it's not like exactly John Coltrane, but the idea that you're taking bebop and like actually doing, you know, individual artistic things with it. So.
Yeah, you know, I think that, you know, again, maybe to get into a point of criticism again, I do think, like I said, there's the passage we've already referenced about kind of this idea of like rearranging things versus like creating something new. I actually think that like that kind of side of the critique in this book isn't super strong. Like I can't really think of like a lot of points in this book where at least this like critique of like the like beats or like at least this group of bohemians, you know, is kind of like just talking about art all the time. It doesn't really come out. I mean, there aren't a lot of scenes of them making art either, but I didn't quite buy them as like these people who are talking about art a lot, because he just doesn't really give us any of those conversations.
Yeah, and like we only get like I do love that bit where Pig Bodine comes to the apartment and he pours like a beer onto his face and he's listening to country music, and then he just goes, "Do you agree that Sartre says that we're all doing an impersonation of our identity?" And like, I felt like the idea that like the contrast between like a huge like ape like sailor like pouring a beer on his face and listening to country music, and then just like immediately asking somebody what they feel about Sartre was supposed to be like the stand-in for like those kinds of conversations, I guess. And it does make me laugh, but yeah, like
I just would have liked a little more of that and a little less like sex farce hijinks.
Yeah, that's definitely not my favorite part about Pynchon is the sex farce hijinks, which I think of there's quite a lot in his body of work. I think I would say overall he loves a good sex farce. So yeah.
I mean, I'm not like wholly against it, but it just kind of feels like, and again, maybe this is again a product of like this being a first book, but it feels like he's going for like what he thinks is going to be the easy laugh a lot.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah,
doing something that might take a little more setup, or again, you know, maybe would ask a little more of his audience in terms of like knowing who Sartre is or something like that.
Well, and then like by the end, like when we get that whole like DC thing with the two blondes named Flip and Flop or whatever, and they're just like they're like bicycling it, like at that point, like I think it's meant to be tiresome, but like at the same time,
and before that, there's another pair of girls named Hanky and Panky.
Yeah, and it's like, all right. Yeah, like it's like sophomoric, I think is how I would describe it.
No, absolutely. It's very like not even like contemporary college humor magazine, but like 1963 college humor magazine. Like, can you believe these dumb co-eds and their big tits?
Yeah, it's like the airline stewardess, they always want to have sex. It's just like, all right. Like, yeah. And then also that gets to the point, like he really does like Pig Bodine. Like Pig Bodine shows up in a lot of his stuff, and Pig Bodine is funny, but he is kind of like this, like sophomoric, like frat guy hero who's like, like an AWOL sailor who just like can smell what kind of beer he's about to drink before it's opened. And like at one point, like tries to sexually assault Paula in like that scene. That's like, I don't know what the tone of that scene is exactly. Like he's a character that Pynchon obviously loves, but then is somewhat like repellent. So yeah.
I mean, I definitely think that there is something to Pynchon, again, you know, being a product of his time, I guess we could say. And I don't mean that to like defend the content, but just kind of like, I think because he has such a long career, you can kind of see what was okay to like write about at certain points in time versus like what isn't. Like there's also a bit in this book where Paula, who's a character we haven't really talked about, but she's the first Maltese character who appears. She kind of ends up coming back to America with Benny, right?
Yes.
And is kind of like his girlfriend initially before they kind of drift apart. But she like doesn't like start wearing blackface, but she starts portraying herself as like a black person because she gets tired of explaining what being Maltese is to people.
Yeah, and like it's revealed at one point that like the woman that the saxophonist McClinton is seeing is Paula, going by Ruby, and I still don't know what I'm supposed to make of that. Like it happens and I just go okay, like yeah. So like
yeah, it kind of like, again, it's another point where it just kind of feels like the book runs out of steam and doesn't know what to do with this character.
Yeah,
because like, again, this isn't like a traditionally plotted novel where it's like, and again, I'm not expecting this to be like super tight and like every single character like has an arc that like leads up to like the big conclusion at the end, but it kind of is like he brought this character in because he was like gonna have Maltese stuff happening later, and so he needed a Maltese person there to kind of like connect the book back to that location. And then he kind of like realized like, oh, I kind of don't need this character. She's not really doing anything.
And then like from Benny's perspective, she's a dependent. Like she's somebody that is attached to him that he doesn't want to take care of because he never wants to take any responsibility. And it's like, I can see that from a thematic level, but then, yeah, and once Benny,
but then
like,
she's not really all that pushy, and she just like takes care of herself fine when she like, once he kind of detaches from her.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I think I agree. Like Paula gets like lost in the shuffle because there's so many characters in this book. Like there's
too many, frankly.
Yeah. Like what is it? Winsome, the jealous husband who's the record executive, and then there's his wife Mafia, who's like a romance novel writer. Not romantasy, but it's like romance. I need
she's like she writes like bodice strippers.
Yeah, I need heroic love. There's just all these like characters, and it's like at some point it's hard to like keep track of like who's who and like what's going on. So
yeah, again, it feels like a weakness of kind of like setting, really kind of doing the book the way he does it all, but like kind of wanting one of the again kind of prongs of the book to be this kind of like ensemble comedy, but then not really having the space to actually like give most of those characters room to like have an arc in any way. And so they all just feel like it feels like Benny Profane, like, and like occasionally bumping into Stencil, but then most of the time just kind of like bumping into various cardboard cutouts on his way to and from like cartoon jobs he has.
Which this is like one of the critiques of Pynchon is that all of his characters are cardboard cutouts, and I think he gets better at it as he goes along. But it's very clear in this book. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna move up the cardboard cutout that's just like funny frat guy, or I'm gonna like move up the cardboard cutout that's just like a bunch of like Hispanic people that we get in a brawl with in a bar, like, or something. Like, yeah, it's very. I think the way of putting it is like, yeah, it's like on one hand ensemble comedy. And then the other hand is like modernist novellas that are set in like very historical time periods. So yeah.
Well, and I think it like comes across as particularly weak because again, there's like this dichotomy he wants to draw between like the animate and the inanimate, but then the characters who are kind of in a way supposed to stand in for the animate, which isn't quite the same as the good in this book, I don't think, but it's still the side we're supposed to like sympathize towards, I guess. But like they don't come across like real living creatures in any way. They feel like not even cartoon characters. I would say like comic strip characters.
That's a good way to put it. They're wacky and zany, and there's like my cartoon job where I have to hunt alligators in the sewer. Even the characters who like have some element of like pathos to them, it's always like kind of through a lens of absurdity. Like Paula kind of feels like the only character who maybe has like a genuinely like kind of sad backstory because she's from the most bombed out place in World War II. and like she's like her husband is weird because her husband is what, Poppy Hod, right? Like that sailor who's like jealous and possessive and kind of a weirdo.
Basically every other character has like comedy problems. Like again, the guy who is married to the romance novelist and is just like he's a henpecked husband who can't please his unpleasable wife. Oh no.
Oh no, yeah. And I have to complain to like my cool beat lady friends. I will say, John, if I was dating Rachel Hourglass, I'd treat her right. I wouldn't treat her like Benny Profane treated her. She'd be my queen. So yeah. And like she's like trying to do good, but then she realizes that everybody in the whole sick crew is like fucking annoying. Like she tells Benny Profane that at one point. Like everyone here is like, I'm beyond all of this now. But
yeah, I like how kind of like under discussed kind of sub thread of the show has been the way we've kind of been like slowly taxonomizing like the way that artsy men like see their ideal woman over the course of this podcast.
Yeah, it's one of the ways that we're doing gender critique. Yeah,
because whenever I read about Victoria Hourglass, there was like a little part of my brain that like flashed the name Phlox right in there.
Well, she's a redhead. She's got really huge red hair, and she's also like really short, I think is the way they describe her. So,
well, yeah, but you know, in much the same way that V looks different every time she shows up but remains.
Yeah, all the men we yeah. Throughout history, we see the archetype of the art BBT ho girl as she appears. Yeah, as she appears throughout history. Yeah.
Okay. Actually, that does like provide us with a good segue to talk about. Talk about V and talk about kind of this. What might be going on there? Because I think that is, I don't know if I want to say it's the most interesting part of the book, because I mean, maybe this is unfair of me at some level, but obviously the most interesting part of this book now is like where it fits into the greater like Pynchonian oeuvre.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little hard to like read this book on its own terms as much as like I would prefer to like try to read it that way. But again, as I was reading it, it was really hard for me to just kind of like take the text as itself without bringing in everything else I know about Pynchon.
Well, and you know, and reader, it's also somewhat difficult to discern like what happens with V, because V sort of shows up in each chapter kind of like not like where's Waldo, but it's like where's V? It's like, you know, because she has different V names like Victoria Wren, the Bad Priest, other names to start with V, Veronica, and like
Manganese.
Yeah, and then there's the rat named Veronica. So like the reading it is somewhat tricky, and I think it's interesting when she shows up in these like fascist situations, like in the last chapter where it's from Sydney, Herbert Sensel's father's perspective. She's like described as just like hanging out with all these like Italian futurists like D'Annunzio, and I'm butchering his name probably, and like other Italian fascists. And then, you know, she's there with the weirdo Dutch people and the Germans in West Africa. And like, she doesn't quite show up in the Egypt chapter, but she's into collecting rocks as a child. And there's these two British spies that are trying to court her. And then in Italy, she's a prostitute who like is described as just like kind of just being there, but also getting the confession of one Evan Godolphin, who is an explorer. And so like her fragmented nature is hard to pierce together. And it seems like the only through line, as we've discussed, is her increasingly mechanization and the fact that she always shows up at these like hinge points in history where things become so decadent that they become so inanimate. And then there's a switch at some point, usually some like political revolution or some like, I think one character talks about like flip flop, like there's a way that everything flips to be against decadence. John, what did you think of the bit, side note, in the Paris chapter where somebody says during decadence, it's always fashionable to become a Catholic? It's
a little close to home.
Yeah. So, So there's a theory of history here that's interesting in terms of these flip-flops between decadence and religion, austerity, like authenticity, which I mean, now that we're maybe in a recession, authenticity's back, baby. But anyway, I think the fact that V is there is interesting. But to your point, as you've said, why does this matter? And I think, I pulled on an essay that I sent you, and it's worth just referencing a little bit. This essay is called, it's a pretty handy essay. It's called A Look Back on Thomas Pynchon's V, an essay by John David Ebert. And, he reads V's arc as the mini novels, in other words, whatever their truth value, since they come from unreliable sources, tell the story of V's descent into mechanization, a descent that almost deliberately parallels the West's descent as a whole into total mechanization and automation through the course of the 20th century. And so the why of this, as he says, is one of the things that Pynchon is doing in this novel is what I would term a recoding of the goddess of Western civilization, the Virgin Mary, into a sort of muse of the machine. So the idea that instead of the divine feminine or the unknowable virgin, it's now this rocket lady. And the rocket lady is always, where history is turning from decadence into, either more decadence or flipping back. And it's supposed to be unstable on purpose, as a way that we can never exactly know what's going on. Now, personally, I find that a little bit unsatisfying, and I don't think I would have come to that conclusion on my own. And instead, again, I kind of go back to the idea of this being kind of postmodern and that there's no unknowable truth. And sure, we can talk about how Herbert Stencil is the son of V and her father. And I think that's interesting to see, the people that are born in this century are the products of mechanization to some degree. But in terms of recoding the divine feminine, I don't know, that's less useful to me as a why, I guess. So I don't know. What are your thoughts, John?
Yeah, I mean, so I think I have a couple different thoughts here. I think it is interesting that kind of over the course, we were talking a little bit kind of the Stencil is an unreliable narrator. I think it's pretty crucial. No one else is aware of V as a figure. Yeah. The people he is interviewing or taking these notes from. He's the only person who's there's a person called V who, if I piece the breadcrumbs together, I'll be able to discover their true identity. So, despite kind of this mechanization piece, which does appear to be kind of this progressive thing, there is kind of this question of is this all imagined? Yeah. Is this a guy describing what is actually perhaps 4 or 5 different women as one woman? I think there's definitely something there in terms of kind of the way that the image of the ideal woman changes. Yeah. I don't mean ideal as in best, but in terms of just the imago of the woman, in terms of the cultural consciousness. Yeah. There's a bit I believe in the Paris chapter where they're talking about prostitutes and how prostitutes are essentially the best prostitutes are essentially inanimate. I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm saying that is what they say in the book. And so, kind of this idea of and again, we see that kind of cropping up in other places, with the bit about rhinoplasty and plastic surgery. The sections about Hourglass and her kind of cloistered childhood, kind of this idea that the ideal woman is an object.
Yeah, and she turns it be and Betty Profanes is if only there was a robot woman, he says that at one point. But if you ever had a problem with her, you could just look it up in the manual how to fix it. So I think that there's something there in terms of the way that women in particular are kind of affected by the mechanization of society in kind of a way that's kind of contradictory. On the one hand, the economic upsets of industrialization are the thing that led to kind of feminism being a going concern. I don't want to be too crudely Marxist about it, but it's the economic disruption of industrialization and capital formation is what
kind of made it possible for women to escape, the constraints of like pre-industrial society and like actually be able to move towards some form of equality. But there's also kind of a way in which, now there's now every woman is like advertised to like meet these beauty standards and to change your body and to change your personality in all these ways. And obviously those pressures still existed before, but now there's so much more in your face. There's so much more like dehumanizing in a way, because again, it's telling you like you should change your body, you should change who you are so that you like meet this mediated spectacle image. I think it's interesting that V, like even as she grows more mechanized, it's always beautiful. She's not like a Borg like type cyborg where it's like scary and fucked up looking. Like she's always like slowly becoming more and more made out of these like incredibly intricate, beautiful like pieces of clockwork and
like the jewel that's in her navel at one point.
Or even like kind of at the end when Stencil is like imagining what like the contemporary V would look like. It's this like almost diamond like construction of like perfect modern like contemporary to the time like building materials. Like she has like a digital brain of like jewel like diodes like blinking, and she has a pure silver wire in her plastic vagina that like fires pleasure like directly into her computer brain.
Doesn't the narrator say like even Herbert could be turned on or something, or depraved, like the whole sick crew? Like I feel like after the narrator gives that description, he's like, Herbert could be just as depraved as the whole sick crew. Anyway,
and so I think that there is something in this kind of goddess image in terms of the way that like the ideal woman has changed into like, or maybe not even changed, but the kind of industrialization has like posited like a woman who is even more like dehumanized in a way, as like the ideal. I think that like I always think back to this poem I read in like my like intro to Greek Civ course in college, and I can't remember who the poet was, one of the lyric poets, and it was kind of like my first like kind of conscious realization of not just like I knew sexism existed in the past, but like realizing like how virulent sexism was in the past, like kind of so it's basically like I'll see if I can track down the poem in the interim, but it's like the poet is describing like the different types of wives you can have, comparing them to different animals.
Oh god. Okay.
So you have like, and there's only one good wife, and that's like the wife who's like a bee and is therefore like industrious and hardworking and never complains. But like the ape wife, the dog wife, and so I think if like the woman of like pre-industrial society was like treated like an animal, the woman of like the contemporary world is treated as a machine.
Well, and I had a question, John. What is the deal with Freud and sex and death? Is the idea that like the sex drive and the death drive are the same? Because I also feel like, as she becomes more mechanized, I'm like looking ahead to Gravity's Rainbow. Have you seen the Gravity's Rainbow cover where it's a rocket wearing like with women's legs, and the women's legs are like wearing like sexy underwear? Because as you're describing that, like the idea of the robot wife, I'm just seeing the like Gravity's Rainbow rocket lady cover. And like, I think there could be something there in terms of like sex death drives like being twinned, but also like I don't know what the deal is with that, but to your point about like the idea of animal wife, like robot wife, like that makes total sense. I like what you're laying down there. So
I feel like the essay, I feel like there were like some pictures of like goddess images through history, and like one of them was like an Egyptian goddess like holding a child but like with cow horns, which, not to like get too reductive, like obviously the Egyptians portrayed all their deities with like animal features, but like I think there's something there in terms of like the ideal woman is like a cow, versus now where it's like the ideal woman is a plastic, like, fuck the hull. Yeah, and I think the kind of the historical like circuit breaking is interesting. Again, it's this place where it feels like Pynchon like strikes on something interesting, but doesn't quite know what to say about it.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like his theory of history is like fully developed yet, for better or worse. Again, especially because there is this weird thing where, again, there's like, you have this kind of positing of like these moments of historical like rupture with, again, this all narrative of like progressive mechanization. Does not like seem to be affected by these like breakpoints.
Right, and the shroud and shock, like the metal, dummies that are like blown up and shot with radioactive waves to like test, Cold War anxieties on humans, so
but I think overall, there's the bit in the epilogue where, and I think this is where our friend Mr. Elbert is probably like kind of starting. There is kind of this weird story that is told to us by a potentially time traveling Arabic fisherman.
The idea that him being potentially time traveling is like, that's like China White Pynchon right there. There's way more of that in his later stuff, and the idea that he shows up at the end of V, I think, is very telling. But anyway, he's a time traveling Arabic fisherman, and he tells the story of like this like divine lady who is like captured by this king, right, to be a part of his harem, and the lady teaches the ladies in his harem to love each other, and to teaches the eunuchs in the king's harem to have sex with each other even though they're eunuchs. And like the idea that she's like that good at like love, like the instruction of love, that she's like upset this order, like this like hierarchical patriarchal order.
Yeah, but there's also she's like a fertility goddess in some ways, or like that's like where the guy is like, maybe that's where this like story started. But it's also kind of implied that like this is, if V is real, this is also V.
Right. Yeah.
Like the original incarnation, which again feels really weird because like there is like sex stuff that is happening in these chapters. And again, it's not done in like the same like sex farce way that it's being done in the Beat chapters.
Yeah.
But like there is like sex stuff happening in these other sections, but V is usually not really party to it.
Right. She's just kind of there at the West African mansion. She has that like love relationship with the dancer, but it's not really sexual, or like physical, we could say. In
Egypt, like she's kind of like being a bit coquettish and like semi-seducing these spies, like,
but she is supposed to be a prostitute, I think, in the Italian chapter, not the Egypt one, but in the Italian
then, like,
one,
we never like see her actually doing anything. So again, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's not there, but it doesn't feel like it's fully developed.
And then like when in the epilogue, when it's shown that like Sydney and her had like a thing, they're not shown having sex, even though it would imply that they did if Herbert is actually, V and Sydney's son, which like is never spelled out directly. But
and I think there's one other thing to talk about here, and that is I guess V's death, which we see in the Fausto chapter that we referenced earlier, which again is this it's actually Paola's father's like personal, it's a letter to her with like snippets of his journals inserted. And
which I'll tell you, John, the first time I read it, I didn't know that all of those Faustos were the same guy. So there's like several Faustos, and it's like, and later, like I had to read it again. I'm like, oh, it's the same guy. So
I thought so too, because I was like, because it's like done as like Fausto, like 1 like Roman numeral, Fausto 2 like Roman numeral, and so it looks like it's like a succession of kings, like historical personages. And so I also had to like go back and like reread that to be like, okay, wait, this is one guy at like different points in his life. It's not 4 different guys who are like fathers and sons. But the as far as we can tell, dies in this chapter, if indeed she can die, perhaps.
Yes.
So this takes place, from what I can tell, during the war.
World War II, I think. And when she is taken on the personage of the bad priest on the island of Malta.
Again, was a bit that I didn't quite get. Like,
yeah.
So she's cross-dressing as a priest and is like kind of set up in this like dilapidated parish, and like all the neighborhood kids like make fun of her for like being weird. And then one day like a bomb gets dropped on the church and she gets crushed.
Yeah, and Fausto sees this, but instead of helping her, he just kind of stands there and watches as she gets forcibly disassembled.
by these like local children.
Yeah, which now, John, I did not see Weapons, but I know what happens at the end of Weapons. And for some reason, this time I was thinking of that as I read this chapter, because it's pretty harrowing stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's pretty gnarly. Like, she's not, again, this is again kind of the weird thing. Like, she doesn't seem inanimate at this point. Like, she seems like a woman who is being tortured to death.
Yeah.
The children pry her various like beautiful accoutrements from her body. She has like fully artificial legs that like look like they're made out of like ivory and gold. She has like
gem false in her teeth.
Navel.
Yeah.
She has false teeth. She has they take like her clockwork eyeballs. Presumably because they're gonna go like fence this stuff to buy food because they're urchins in a war zone.
Right. Yeah. The most bombed part of World War II. Yeah. So.
Yeah. And Fausto has a lot of guilt basically because he just like watches this happen instead of like chasing off the kids and helping her.
And like he wanted to be a priest and he gave it up. And so he pretends to give her last rites after she's been forcibly disassembled. So
yeah, and I suppose we can tell that is her death.
Yeah.
Ben, what the fuck do you think is going on in that scene?
I don't know, John. To be completely honest, like there's something to be said for the fact that like the fact that Malta could be bombed so much is because of rockets, and maybe I can't get past the reading of this in like relationship to Gravity's Rainbow, with the idea that like as these rockets are like hitting fucking Malta, these children like take revenge on this lady by like disassembling her like she's like a disassembled rocket or something, and like taking all these parts away from her. Like I can't quite read it besides that, because like again, like I don't know what to think of it other than like yeah, she would just become further inanimate, but it turns out she still is animate, and that's what lends the scene its sort of like horrifying aspect, is that like yeah, she's still alive as she's being like tortured to death. But something in the context of Malta being the most like rocketed place, in World War II is to me like underneath that scene in some way.
Yeah, this is the point where I feel like kind of the idea of V as a character kind of starts breaking down for me, in that, like I said, I don't want this to be like a sci-fi novel where like Pynchon lays out exactly what, like how lady become robot.
Right. Yeah.
But I guess like there's an ambiguity for me in terms of V as a character. Like, is this a metaphysical process that's happening? Like, is she just spontaneously becoming more and more mechanical as time goes on because she's some kind of spiritual being who like reflects human like belief or culture? Or is she like a woman who has like somehow found super science that can like let her replace her frail human body with mechanical parts like voluntarily, out of like some desire to be like more beautiful or like permanent. There's a lot made of like the fact that she seems ageless, like she always looks young when she appears, and that's implied to be because of this mechanization, this replacing of her
her frail, changeable human flesh with like stable, static machine. And I think there's something here. If that is kind of how we're supposed to read it, this is like a woman who is doing something voluntarily out of some desire to become more permanent or to become like more beautiful. Then this section kind of makes more sense, even if like I think there's something kind of again a little nasty in there. Where again it's kind of this thing where it's like, oh, you can't align yourself with the inanimate world. You in fact like cannot replace your your frail, weak human flesh with like glorious steel and chrome. You can try, but you can still get hit with a rocket and you're going to die like regardless. It's not actually going to make you more permanent in the world than anything else, because even the inanimate world is ultimately destroyable.
Well, and I mean, the way you put it that way, it almost makes me think like her, like the idea of the Mecco lady is just like disseminated into the atmosphere after World War II. And so like the idea that V is like everywhere now, like, can still be killed as a person, but her like robot essence, all the children are like running around with it. And then, now we get like Shroud and Shock and stuff like in the current timeline. But
yeah, whereas like, but yeah, if she's like a more spiritual being and like the mechanical replacement is like some kind of metaphysical or like magical thing, this scene makes less sense to me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Right, because then it's just kind of like the metaphysical. So
and like, how did she die? Like, if she wasn't actually like a thing.
right. Yeah. What happened?
Maybe I'm missing something here. This could be just a subtlety of the text that I skimmed over this time. But I think that like the read where she's a person who is trying and failing to become inanimate or to become a machine is more fruitful to me than like, oh, she is literally a goddess who is like reflecting back like the beliefs of humankind.
The machine goddess. Yeah.
Yeah. But then that reading that, Ebert offers and that I think we both find interesting, like kind of becomes a little less like coherent, and like the bit at the end about again this goddess figure like suddenly becomes like kind of pointless. I don't know. It's tricky
because then you're just kind of like, okay, like, all right, so that that ended now. I mean, and I guess like one thing to like, and this feels like a cop out, is to say like a lot of this is reflected through other people, except for the epilogue, because I don't think we're told who's narrating the epilogue unless it's supposed to be like Sydney, like from the narrator perspective. Like I don't think it's a document. It's not like it's not been stencilized like the other ones. But yeah, I'm with you, John, that the idea of her being like this metaphysical robot goddess that is thus disseminated into the atmosphere post World War II is kind of unsatisfying. So, but maybe that's the point. Those postmoderns with all their tricky, narrative, the abandonment of narrative closure.
Yeah. So Ben, that I'm curious. You said you found Betty Profane's ending to be tragic. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we should talk about that.
End here?
Yeah, because we're coming to the end here. So like, I think he's like doomed. Like the idea.
Well, can you lay out the Betty Profane's ending for our listeners a little bit?
Yeah. So I think he's doomed because he gets to Malta and he's basically abandoned by Stencil because Stencil meets Fausto Magistral, and Fausto's like, yeah, I mean, like I can't really tell you anything about V. Like she's gone. I think you're grasping at straws here. And then he chases some leads down, and he's like, all right, I think I got something. On to the next thing. I think V went to Stockholm after this or something like that. And so he abandons Benny there, and Benny is like he's been sick or drunk, and so he wakes up and like puts his hat on because he's described as having a cowboy hat, which is a detail I love. Can you imagine kind of like a fat guy in a cowboy hat, like just wearing jeans and just being like a huge drunk guy? Anyway, so he goes down and he finds an American and they reminisce, And like she reads him this poem, and the poem's like kind of bad, but it's like attempting to summarize like I am this decade. And then she asks him if he's learned anything, and he goes, I don't think I've learned anything at all. Like, and then like they basically are portrayed as like running into the night, and then all of the lights go out. like all of the lights go out, and they're just like in the darkness, like running down the street in Malta. And it just felt like that atmosphere of like he's just gonna keep bumming around. He's never going to learn anything. He's not going to take responsibility. He'll probably treat Brenda Wigglesworth, which is her name, like shit. And he's just like, this is what it feels. This is what it's like to be a beat like forever. like it's like maybe he'll end up like Neil Cassidy and drive the bus that the Merry Pranksters used in the 60s. But Neil Cassidy also had a heart attack at the age of like 45 because he did too much speed. So like, I don't know, the idea of like taking a point to the end of the line, like the lights going out, I feel like his quest is sort of paralleled with Stencil's because they're both looking for something that they're not going to find. But I find Benny's to be a lot more tragic, I guess, because like, yeah, the lights going out, not learning anything. At least, you know, Herbert Stencil has this sort of like quixotic like pursuit of like, I will find the truth, you know, but Benny hasn't learned anything and he's doomed to be a schmeal forever, which I find to be tragic.
Yeah, you know, that brings me back to something we were chatting a little bit about before the episode started, and I think it's probably the best place to kind of maybe come to our closing thoughts. So, you know, like we said, Pynchon, a great example of again kind of this paranoid style in American literature, and you know. I think that there is a way, I don't think it's necessarily a common way, but there's a way you can read Pynchon as kind of crudely anti-modernity. I think probably with this book in particular, because there is kind of this anti-machine, anti-technology like vein running through it. And I think like any like paranoid style like is going to have like a crude conservative reading that you can do with it, you know, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. I think Pynchon is not, he does not come like, he's not a reactionary exactly. He's definitely like, he's paranoid, he's distrustful of modernity and like what it's doing to our minds. But he does not like, I don't get the impression at any point in this book that he thinks that the humanity's past was necessarily better.
If anything, these same problems have recurred in the past.
Modernity has just kind of slapped a new coat of paint on them and like made them more intensive than they might have been before. You know, and I guess my question for you, Ben, and maybe this is something we'll develop more as we talk through kind of these Pynchons that we're doing this season. You know, in terms of kind of this paranoid style that Pynchon is so well known for, this distrust of modernity, this distrust of modern America in particular. Do you think he, like, I'm guessing you agree with me that he is not, again, like a conservative. He is not someone saying like, oh, we need to like go back, or we need to like cling to these older ways of doing things and like not change things so that things stay familiar. But do you think he offers a way out of like the conundrum of modernity, kind of this destabilization and alienization and technological acceleration that we find ourselves in? Or do you think that he basically thinks we're doomed like Benny, you know, or is it just a matter of like how fast are we going to run into the night and have the lights go out?
Yeah. I mean, so I think maybe there's two answers. One, I think the text does give, and it's interesting because it sort of like prefigures David Foster Wallace's whole problem with realizing that like saying things sentimentally and sincerely is actually the best way. So as McClintock,
no,
I'm sorry, John, it's true.
I spent so much time dedicating myself to irony.
Well, okay, so get this, because I read this and I'm like, this is like it's not David Foster Wallace's whole career, but it's interesting how he sees past some of the problems in this first book. So McClintock says, there came to McClintock something it was time he got around to seeing, that the only way clear of the cool, crazy flip-flop was obviously slow, frustrating, and hard work. Does this sound like David Foster Wallace to you? Love with your mouth shut, help without breaking your ass or publicizing it. Keep cool, but care. He might have known if he'd used any common sense. It didn't come as a revelation, only something he soon as not admitted. So the idea that like being sincere, keep cool, but care, that's one solution that the book offers, almost knowing that it sounds weird compared to all of the like postmodern fun and games, like irony, hip, like plate twirling. And that's one thing. And I think that leads to Pynchon having like, not like a conservative streak, but like a sentimental streak. Like the idea that like we know what's good for us, we just need to do it, and it's hard and it's slow and it's frustrating. The other answer, and this is one that's not going to come clear until later, is at some point Pynchon gets really into extrasensory perception, mysticism, Kabbalah, the fucking like divine code of the world. Like he gets really into like, for lack of a better word, anti-materialist things. I don't know how seriously he takes them, but they sort of to me present to him as like this tantalizing answer that is not as, you know, determinedly materialistic or vulgarly Marxist as he sometimes can get, even if I think he's not quite that. And that won't become apparent until later stuff. I think it's going to be very apparent in Bleeding Edge and Shadow Ticket when we get to Shadow Ticket. And I think it's something that he gets more interested in being, like, as you said at the beginning, John, kind of a magpie, that he's like, what are these alternative explanations to what's going on? So the two answers are sentimental, like hard work, we know what's good for us, and then we could just say like metaphysical, like yearning maybe, or something like that. So yeah.
Well, you know, I think that's interesting, Ben. You know, we didn't really get to it, but I'm going to bring it up here now because I don't want us to have said that we were going to do this and then not do it. I think there's something there in terms of the way he reads the origin of Kilroy. The World War II graffiti guy who's like a guy with like peeking up over a wall with like his big nose like coming down.
There's a bar in one of my old hometowns that is just called Kilroy's. So yeah.
But Pynchon posits that it is sort of basically like there's a schematic for something called like a band pass filter, which I guess is some kind of like circuit or some kind of electrical thing. And it's one of those things where you look at it and it kind of looks like a face with a nose like falling over a wall with like little hands. And, you know, I think that there's something there in terms of kind of like looking at the world as a human being. And like, even if it's futile at some level, even if the quote unquote inanimate world is at some level unknowable, and like we can't actually collate all the contents of the universe in our brains, you know, looking at something and like doing your best to like relate to the world as a human being, even if like it's frustrating and it doesn't always like make sense, but like trying to like see the places to like find humanity in like a world where it seems like there isn't room for it. And I think that kind of does both. In a way, like that's both kind of keep calm and care. It's also a little bit of like metaphysical, like gobbledygook. At least that's my feeling. Maybe I'm not developing something that makes any sense. But I feel like there's something there.
That's a great read of the Kilroy stuff, because I got to that and I just was like, that's interesting, and I didn't have like an explanation for it, and I think that's a good read of it. So like the idea that you could. Yeah,
I've always been fascinated by like the way that like I know everyone does this, but I feel like I'm particularly susceptible to it. Where like I'll look at like a coat hook and it'll have like two screws in it, and I'll be like, that's a face.
yeah.
And I know everyone does that, but for me, it's always been like a thing that I'm always like very conscious of my brain doing.
And so I'm always like very interested in that. And I think it is kind of this weird way in which like you look at the world and you try to find like humanity in it when like you're not dealing with the human at all. You're not even dealing with something that's alive, but like your brain defaults to treating everything like a human being.
Yeah. And when I think that even becomes even more apparent with the dehumanization that happens in this book too. Like, you know, the idea to see people as people and not as objects. So
yeah, but also like the way that we insist on seeing objects as people.
You're right. Yeah.
Well, this was fun. Really looking forward to talking Bleeding Edge here soon.
It's going to be great, listeners. We hope you tune in.
Yeah. As always, you know, like and subscribe. You know the drill. I don't know. I just got back from a wedding and I'm pretty tired. So
we'll see you down at the Rusty Spoon, listeners.
Till next time. Semper Vux. Get it? Books with a V.
Semper Vux.
Thank you for listening to The Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, you can email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir.